Welcome to the Hearts of the Holy Family. I'm your host, Yves Jacques, and I have a very special guest today, my former pastor for 20 years. He's been a faithful pastor for my children, for my family. My children were altar boys serving under him. Father Charles DiMascolo was a teacher before he became a priest, so he interested my children in art and many things. He had a great devotion to Saint Anne, and that we, with my children and my boys particularly, we went to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré on pilgrimage. So Father is going to give a testimony of his journey with good Saint Anne. Saint Anne is the feast of Saint Anne is coming in a few days, and so we're preparing ourselves, and hopefully you could join us in this pilgrimage to learn more about good Saint Anne, who is the mother of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the grandmother of Jesus. For those who are unaware of the this great journey that we're doing with Saint Anne was the one who received in her womb the Immaculate Conception, and in her womb the Immaculate Heart of Mary was there beating in her heart, in her womb. And so when we have this devotion to Our Lady, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, well, we know that it was through the yes of Saint Anne that she accepted to have the Virgin Mary. And Our Lady was, by singular grace, conceived the Immaculate. So you just imagine, when we invoke Our Lady, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, we are invoking also and thanking Saint Anne for her role in bringing us the Blessed Virgin Mary in the world. So, Father, I wanted to ask you, because you are a recipient of many miracles of Our Lady and good Saint Anne. And how did that come about?
Well, my introduction to Saint Anne is kind of an interesting story. When I was probably around maybe 6, 7 years old, maybe even a little younger, I remember one day my mom took me shopping. We went to Springfield. Springfield was the shopping area for us, a big city of Springfield. And I remember distinctly, we were crossing the street and we were going to Forbes and Wallace, big department store in Springfield. Right there in front of Forbes and Wallace, between the two entranceways, there was a man sitting on a camp stool with a bucket between his feet. And my mother bent down and whispered to me and said, "Look, there's the miracle man of Saint Anne." I didn't know what she was talking about, but it was the miracle man of Saint Anne. And who was that? Well, over the years, I've learned a great deal about the miracle man of Saint Anne. Now, this was in the 40s that I saw and met this miracle man of Saint Anne. But I've learned so much about him since then. The miracle man was Andrew Ahearn. Andrew Ahearn, as a young man, was working with a trucking company, and he had a terrible accident. He was on the back of the truck. The truck made a wild turn, and he fell out of the truck and damaged his back very severely. In fact, because of this, he had to be in a body brace, and he was in constant pain. And when his one regret was that because of the pain, he was never able to hold his little baby. He had just had a little baby girl, Rita Ahearn, and he wasn't even able to lift her or carry her or hold her because he didn't have the strength. He could barely walk He had to use 2 crutches, and he was in constant pain. At any rate, at one point in the 20s, the 1920s, he heard about a pilgrimage to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré in Canada from Springfield. They were taking a train in those days from Springfield all the way to Beaupré, a direct train. Mr. Ahern, in a great act of faith, told his wife he is going and he has to have a miracle. He has to have a miracle for his family. He can't go on living this way in constant pain. He has to be able to support his family. There's going to be a miracle. He needs a miracle, and good St. Anne was going to provide. So he got on that train and he made 3 promises. 3 promises. The first promise he made was that he would not ever drink hard cider again. He loved hard cider, so he was never going to drink hard cider again. Then he made a promise that he was going to make the first Fridays for the rest of his life. The third promise was that he was not going to eat anything until they got to Canada, from Springfield to Canada. It was only a few hours trip, maybe about 5 or 6 hours by train. So he was not going to eat anything. And then he decided one more promise, and this was the big one. He promised that if he was healed, he would bring and pay for pilgrims, handicapped pilgrims. He would help them and he would pay for them to go on pilgrimage to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré. On your screen, I think you can see a picture of Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré, the miraculous statue that is in the Basilica in Beaupré, Canada. At any rate, so here they are, they're on the train, they arrive in Beaupré, he goes into the church and he goes to the miraculous statue of Saint Anne. He kneels there and he begins to pray. Saint Anne, I need a miracle. Saint Anne, I need to be healed so that I can take care of my family, so that I can lift my little baby, so I can hold my little baby Rita. And he saw at that point a vision of Saint Anne. Saint Anne came to him, looked at him, and turned away. And she started walking off to the sacristy. Well, Mr. Ahern panicked at that point, and he screamed, Saint Anne, don't leave me. I need a miracle. And he passed out. He fell back and passed out. Well, of course, that attracted a big crowd. The man was screaming. He passed out. He's on the ground, and his crutches are there. When they revived him, he realized he had no pain. He had absolutely no pain. And then he realized he could move without any pain. And then he realized he could move without his crutches. He took off his brace and he was completely healed. Well, of course, the crowd went crazy. And on the way back to Springfield, the Springfield newspapers, everybody heard about this great miracle, and they all knew Mr. Ahern because he was well known in Springfield. The newspapers, the Springfield Daily News, had huge headlines, miracle, 4-inch headlines, miracle on the front page. Can you imagine that? To see that in the paper, on the front page of a secular paper, miracle.
What year was that, Father?
It was 1920, probably around 1926, 25, somewhere.
Almost 100 years ago.
Almost, yeah. And
Wow.
At any rate, when he got to the train station in Springfield, thousands of people had gathered to see this miracle. They knew Mr. Ahern. They had seen him. He was, a known figure with his crutches, walking through the streets, doing this, that. They knew him. And there he was walking. Now, here's the interesting thing. Mr. Ahern did fulfill all of his promises to St. Anne, including the pilgrimage every year. Actually, he had, it grew and grew to the point where he would have 2, 3, 4 buses every year. At first it was the trains, then later on it was the buses that he would take. And he did manage to collect money and pay for it so that it was always a good. Now, Mr. Ahern, interestingly enough, was also very active in the government of Springfield. He was an alderman. He was on the board of selectmen and all of those things. So he was very active politically. He had a great deal of influence. People knew him. And like I say, I saw him when he was collecting money in front of the Forbes and Wallace department store. Very humble man, very humble man. And every year he would bring these pilgrimages to Beaupré in Canada. And then that would always happen in July. They would go for the Feast of Saint Anne, which is the 26th of July, coming up on Monday. And then in November, he would bring the priests from Beaupré with the relic of Saint Anne, and they would do a reverse pilgrimage and visit a number of churches in the Diocese of Springfield and hold services and prayers to a good Saint Anne. So he really was a great devotee of Saint Anne, a great lover of the grandmother of Saint Anne. Now, I have another connection to Saint Anne, though. When I was in elementary school, our pastor, I must have been maybe in the second grade, our pastor got a beautiful statue of Saint Anne for the church. Monsignor Vieloch, this beautiful statue. And it was a Immaculate Conception Church in Indian Orchard. This is the Polish church. And I remember going in during recess one day, and the statue had just been placed in its position by the altar. And I remember kneeling at the altar rail and thinking, good Saint Anne, you're the grandmother of Jesus, the babci, as we say in Polish, the babci of Jesus. I don't have a babci. My babci died before I was born. My grandmother died before I was born. And, everybody else had grandmothers. They were wonderful. Grandmothers are wonderful. They always take your side. They spoil you rotten. They make cookies for you, And so I was convinced I was missing something. I didn't have a grandmother. So I said, Saint Anne, you're Jesus's grandmother. You're going to be mine too. You're my babci. From that moment on, I always had a special devotion to Saint Anne, my babci, my grandmother.
And how old were you?
I must have been in the second grade by then,
Okay.
maybe the first or second grade. Yeah, I was a pushy kid, I made that demand. I wanted Saint Anne to be my grandmother because I wanted those cookies. I wanted to be spoiled. I wanted somebody to take my side, Now, I heard later on of another miracle, and maybe several years later after Mr. Ahern, which always impressed me. When I was first ordained, I was in a parish in Springfield, Our Lady of the Rosary. And there had been a man there who was a fireman, and he was involved as a firefighter in a rather terrible incident because the fire involved chemicals of some sort. I don't understand what it was, but the smoke from the fire, which he had to run into and take care of things and do things, was very heroic. But the smoke was filled with a fine, fine dust, got into his eyes. And every time he blinked, it scratched his eyes to the point where he's blinded. And he was, his eyes were like bloody masses. He was terrible to look at, because he had these bloody eyes, looked like something from a horror story. At any rate, he obviously could not work anymore because he was blind. He was totally helpless. They went to Canada, to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré, and he went before the Miraculous statue with his wife, and they began to pray. And then they got up and he started to cry. And he said, Saint Anne didn't hear my prayer. And his wife looked at him and said, but your eyes aren't bleeding anymore. They're normal. They're clear. And at that point, he realized he could see. He could see again, So that was the second miracle that I remember of a good Saint Anne at at Beaupré. Now, you really have to visit Beaupré if you've never been there before. It's not that difficult to get to, and it's a magnificent basilica, but it is a of miracles, and it goes early days. And I think Mr. Jacques will tell you some about that. The church itself, the first church, because there were 3 churches that were built, I think. The first church was built by a group of sailors who had been saved from shipwreck on the St. Lawrence River. Do you know what year that was?
I believe it was in 1657 or 56.
So you can see that the devotion and the shrine goes back, way back
Right.
to that point. And so they made a promise, if they were saved during this terrible storm, they would build a church to Sainte-Anne, right? Yeah. And then they began to fulfill that promise, and they were building the church by hand with rocks, a small church, not very large, but big enough. And there was a man in the village of Beaupré who was blind. Do you know his name?
Yeah, it was Louis Guimont. His
Yeah.
name Guilmont, you
Yeah.
would say in English, but Louis Guimont
Yeah.
was the person that was miraculously healed
Yeah.
right at the spot.
And he went there, and the first stone, he was going to put the first stone on the foundation. And as soon as he did that, he was healed miraculously of his blindness. I mean, it's an amazing, amazing thing that from the very beginning, Sainte-Anne is associated with great miracles. Now, there's another story that has a connection to us up here in Franklin County, Massachusetts. The next town over from us is Deerfield.
Yes.
Old Deerfield. I don't know if you people have ever heard of Old Deerfield, but it's a beautiful place. They have a wonderful museum. The buildings in the town, it's a little village, are all beautifully preserved, old homes. You can go to to visit them. As a matter of fact, Memorial Hall, the museum, one of the museums in the village, is the first museum in the United States. Did you know that?
I didn't know.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's a magnificent collection. But the interesting thing is, Deerfield is very famous because of what we call the Deerfield Massacre.
Right.
In the 1700s, the early 1700s, during the French and Indian War, the Indians and the French attacked the village, and they wiped it out pretty much. And they took most of the residents that were still alive back as captives and hostages to Canada, to a village outside of Montreal called Cagouagna. And there they settled them down. And in those days, you weren't so much a prisoner as you were adopted by the people that took you in and captured you. So it was a different kind of situation. So they lived fairly well, not in terror or the like. Some of them, as a matter of fact, managed to get ransomed and come back to Deerfield,
Right, yes.
but not all of them. And the interesting story is the son of the minister of Deerfield, who was, you know, this name.
Stephen Williams.
See, I don't remember names. Mr. Jacques has a better memory than I. So Williams was the minister's son, the older son. I think he was about 16, 17 at the time. Tells in his diary, which you can get, it's been published, tells of a journey that he took with his Indian family, you know, that had adopted him, and they were going down the St. Lawrence River, and they were coming to the church
Of Sainte-Anne.
the miraculous church of Sainte-Anne. And he relates in his diary that he saw an old Indian, going into the chapel, all bent over, arthritis or whatever. He could barely walk. He was shuffling. They had to help him up the stairs. And he was, like I say, bent over almost like a pretzel. And then he saw him maybe 20 minutes, a half hour later, come out. And he was walking perfectly healed, strong, straight. and he saw this amazing miracle.
So he
right
witnessed the miracle.
Yeah, he
at
witnessed
Saint
a
Anne.
miracle, and he wrote about it in his diary.
And he was a Protestant.
He was a Protestant. Yeah,
he never became Catholic.
he never
either.
he became Catholic, but his sister did.
Yeah,
His
Eunice
sister did, yes.
Williams did become Catholic.
Yeah, but sadly he never did, and I think he became a minister.
In Longmeadow.
In Longmeadow, yes, yeah. But imagine all of these things were happening at St. Anne's. So
that would have been in 1704, because
Yes.
that was the Deerfield massacre was 1704.
1704.
So he would have visited Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré just at the beginning of the, and there's many saints. I know that there's Saint Mary of the Incarnation. She wrote about it, of all the people that were going, and there was miracles happening, one miracle after the other. And so it's been for 300 years.
Yeah,
300 and some years.
I know she lived in Quebec.
Yes.
At the Ursuline Convent.
Yes, she was the
which
founders
is
of the Ursulines. Yes.
magnificent place to visit too, by the way. Have you ever been there?
Yes. She was recently canonized, so
Yes.
now Saint.
Saint Marie, yeah.
And also the relic of Saint Anne, the original relic, was brought also by Saint Francois de Laval, who was the first bishop of Canada. And he was basically the first bishop of all of North America. So it's a great, beautiful history where Saint Anne has showered us with graces. And like you had mentioned, Father, here in Fiskdale, Massachusetts, there's a shrine there, and you might want to talk about that.
Oh, the shrine it's Fiskdale is the village of Sturbridge. Some of you may have heard of Sturbridge, Old Sturbridge Village. It's a big museum of early New England life. And just down the way from the Old Sturbridge Village is Fiskdale, and is the shrine of St. Anne's. And it was founded, you've got the dates.
It was 1879.
1879, founded by a Monsignor.
Monsignor Elzéar Brochu.
Yeah. It's a good thing Mr. Jakes is here, because my mind is not, I don't remember these names. But the Monsignor himself was very sick, and he promised St. Anne if she would heal him, he would build a church dedicated to her. And he was healed. And he built the Church of St. Anne. It's a lovely little church to good St. Anne. Then a year later, there was a woman there who had a serious problem. I think it was like congestive heart failure. She was filling up with liquid in her. She was to the point of death. And her name was?
Mary Hood.
Okay, Mary prayed to good St. Anne, and she was immediately healed also. And so because of that healing, the people were so enthused. They gathered around her, and they began a procession. And that tradition of processions, candlelight processions, began with her and with that miracle. And what's interesting is that Mary spent a lot of time at the church after that. She was like a sacristan. She took care of the altar linens, the flowers, and light. And she was there for the rest of her life. I don't know for how long, but for like maybe about 20 years or so, still working in the church, helping out, praying. And she died kneeling before the statue of St. Anne. Oh, wow. She was elderly by that time. And on her last day, she came into the church. She must have known it was her time. She was quite elderly at that point. She knelt down before the statue of St. Anne, and she passed on, which I think is a beautiful thing. You know, she loved good St. Anne. She was always working in the Church of St. Anne, and she did that for good St. Anne, and St. Anne took her home right there in front of her. So that's St. Anne and Fiskdale. And we used to go there because it was very close to our home. It's a beautiful shrine with outdoor stations of the cross. It has a huge Calvary that people piously go up on their knees, and it has the miraculous statue of Saint Anne with you can see numerous crutches and braces and all sorts of mementos of miracles that have happened there, and it's a lovely place. And it was something that we used to do on a Sunday afternoon. You'd go there and have a picnic. They have a picnic area too. I mean, it's a nice place. It's a family place.
You had a devotion. I remember as a child going there with my mom and dad. So these are beautiful things. And there are many places in North America because of the miracles of Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré and others that invoked Saint Anne. The oldest church in the United States after St. Augustine, which was in Florida, which was under the Spanish rule, the oldest church was Saint Anne in Detroit, is 1701. And it was dedicated to Saint Anne because of the miracles that had happened there. And they have very large processions. I was there maybe 10 years ago with some pilgrims, and it was just amazing to see. I thought I was like in Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré. It was, and it is a magnificent basilica as well. And that's just one of many. There's St. Anne's, and you had mentioned in Scranton, the National Shrine of St. Anne. Yeah. And also there's St. Anne of Ile-la-Motte in Vermont as well.
And also in Fall River.
St. Anne, yes. And the one in Fall River, they were planning on closing that church permanently. And a group of people recently purchased it and are planning to remodel it and to refurbish it, really, with private funds. To honor St. Anne. So we're praying with them and for them so that the one in Fall River, I have been there. I was there actually a few years ago. And at the time we were unable to go on the main church because it was, they were claiming it was unsafe. But now it's under new management, a group of private people that are trying to bring back the devotion to St. Anne. So if you could look it up online, St. Anne of Fall River, and if you think that you could help bring back, restore, it's a magnificent church also dedicated to St. Anne. And you just see the work of the pilgrims and the work of the parishioners, how they really, because of the miracles that had happened around them, and I've witnessed miracles in my family, and also this dear devotion to Saint Anne started when I was a child. My mom's name was Annette. That means Little Anne. My wife's name is Anne Marie, under Saint Anne as well. And when we first got married, the first place we went is to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré to thank Saint Anne and to help us to raise our children.
In those good old days, by the way,
yes,
a lot of people made their honeymoon.
Well, that was I did my honeymoon there.
Yes, you imagine that, going on a honeymoon to a shrine. Talk about another age of faith and wonder and.
Well, beauty. I'm one of those. 36 years ago.
Yeah.
So one of the things that comes to me, talking about these beautiful testimonies, and I want to thank Father for these testimonies because it's you witnessed them, you saw them with your own eyes. This Mr. Ahearn, and there is a stained glass window in Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré dedicated to Mr. Ahearn because it was one of the amazing miracles. And how did the devotion go to Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré? Well, apparently there was the group of fishermen and sailors that came from Brittany, France. They were in peril, and they promised Saint Anne because the devotion to Saint Anne had actually started there prior to that in Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré in France. And so they are the ones that brought the devotion here. So they received a special miracle of their being saved from the peril, and dedicated the church to Saint Anne in Quebec.
Now you notice that's the important thing. They built a church.
Amen.
And that's something I think we don't appreciate today.
Exactly.
That they built a church. Think about this. When the Blessed Mother appeared at Lourdes, when the Blessed Mother appeared at Guadalupe, when the Blessed Mother appeared at Fatima, and all of these big miraculous manifestations, the Blessed Mother always asks for one thing in particular. Do you know what it is? Build a church.
Build a sanctuary.
Build a church. Why? Because she wants a place where her son will be worshipped. She wants a place where Jesus will be glorified. She wants a place where Jesus will be manifest to the world. And a church, today, sometimes people say, oh, it's only a building. No, it's not only a building. No, a church is a channel of grace. A church is a place where heaven and earth meet. A church is a place where we are nourished on the very living and true body and blood of Jesus Christ. That doesn't happen just anywhere. So a church building is unique. It's not just a building. Somebody once said, oh, they're memory boxes. Excuse me, what does that even mean? No, a church is a holy place. A church is a place where God and man meet. A church is a place where we are graced. Several years ago, there were some people who had very strange ideas. Did you notice that there are a lot of strange people around? At any rate, a few priests had decided during Lent, they would take the holy water out of the holy water fonts in church and fill it with sand. I don't know what that was supposed to mean, but that was. I know in one church, not only did they fill it with sand, but they put a little branch of thorns. And I remember going in there and I was wounded. I was bleeding. I thought, what is this all about? Well, a number of people complained to Rome, all right? And they asked, is this something that we should be doing? Emptying the holy water fonts during the whole season of Lent. Rome wrote back and said, no, that's forbidden. Why? Because the holy water was a channel of grace. It was an opportunity for grace. Wow, I never thought of that. Yes. So every time I blessed myself, I was being graced. I was being blessed. And think of this. If holy water is a channel of grace, what about a church building? The church building is more than a channel of grace. It is a place where God meets man and man meets God. Over our church, I'm sure you remember, over the front door, I had painted in gold letters in Latin. Remember the words? Domus Dei Porta Caeli. You know what that means? That means this is the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. That's what a church is. You could define the church in just that phrase. The house of God, the gate of heaven. You see, some people today have gotten to a non-Catholic idea of church buildings as simply a gathering place, a meeting house, a place of prayer. It's more than that. It's a place where we come to Jesus Christ and he comes to us. Wow, that's an amazing thing. So the Blessed Mother always asked that a church be built. And when the St. Anne devotion started, it started with a church. They had to build a church. And now in Fall River, you say they are calling for help. Help them. They are building a church. They are restoring the church to the glory of God for the salvation of souls. That's very important. That's not something to be just, thought of it as a nice thing. No, it's more than just a nice thing.
Just think of the glories that could happen through the miracles of St. Anne. And there are miracles that are continuing to happen. And so, like you say, the church. And, the story of Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré was a peasant that had a vision of St. Anne. St. Anne came to him and asked for a church. St. Anne said this: God desires that I be honored in this spot. Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's really God that wanted the church in that spot. But St. Anne was there to lead them. There was a miraculous statue that was found on the grounds. Miraculously, it was led. St. Anne brought them to the spot. and they started digging. They found this miraculous statue that had been buried for 900 years. There was a sanctuary there, and our late Saint Anne said, "I wish to be honored here." And from that devotion of Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré in France came the devotion of these sailors that were saved from peril. And so the Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré is kind of the twin sanctuary of this sanctuary in Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré. And the visionary his name is Yves, like my first name, Yves Nicolazic, and he is a servant of God. Now his cause is open for canonization. A very holy man. He always had his rosary in his hands. He was always seen praying, even prior to the apparition. You know, he was a very devout man. So he was just used as an instrument, and then the devotion spread like wildfire. And the reason why is because soon after the discovery of the miraculous statue, many miracles were attributed to Saint Anne. And so Saint Anne is the patron saint of Brittany, France, along with Saint Yves. Saint Yves is also the patron of France, but not Yves Nicolazic. It's Yves Gilmartin, which was in the 1300s. So this is his burial ground in the sanctuary of Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré. I had been there in 2001. I had the privilege of being there. Very holy ground. So again, God himself wanted the sanctuary to honor him.
Now we have another connection here. Remember, we told you about Deerfield, the massacre in Deerfield.
Yes.
There's an interesting connection there. When they had done their damage to the village, and they were fleeing, one of the things that they did was they stole the church bell of the Protestant church. They stole the church bell, and they took it with them to Cagwagna. Now, Cagwagna was an Indian village, and they were very devout. They were very devout. They were also warriors, but they were very devout. And the interesting thing about Cagwagna, it's outside of Montreal. You can still go there. It's an Indian territory, actually. Yeah. It's separate, but you can go into the village, and you can go into the church there where they brought the bell. And the bell is still there in that church on the side aisle on the floor. From Deerfield. They took it all the way from Deerfield. Now, here's a point about that. The church bell is in front of the altar of Saint Anne in Cagwagna. But there's more. That church is dedicated to Saint Kateri Tekakwitha.
Yes.
The first Indian saint,
yes.
Saint Kateri Tekakwitha. She lived in Cagwagna, and she died in Cagwagna, and she was buried in Cagwagna. And her body is now in a beautiful sarcophagus on the one side of the church. The bell from Deerfield is on the other side.
So we do have a connection.
So there is a connection to Deerfield and to that. And as I say, it's in front of the altar of Good Saint Anne in that church. You know, we can look back at these things. History is an interesting thing to look at. It's a beautiful thing to look at. Sometimes terrible things were done. Sometimes beautiful things were done. But listen, we have to look at these things and learn from them. We mustn't hide them. We mustn't tear them down. We mustn't cover them over. History is something that we will learn from, or we will have to repeat it ourselves. So we can learn from the mistakes of history, or we're going to be imperiled by our ignorance. And we can learn some very beautiful things about the history of the church, the history of the saints, the history of miracles. And the thing that will impress, that always impresses me, is the fact that God has manifested his love, his truth, and his beauty with so many amazing miracles. Can I tell you about one more miracle?
Sure, we have time.
Yeah, well, this is a miracle that happened not far from Sainte-Anne-de-Beaupré, at a shrine, a little church called Our Lady of the Cape, Notre Dame du Cape. You know that shrine.
Yes.
Well, here's the thing about that. This is such a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it is tied to Saint Anne in that so many people, when they make the pilgrimage, they always go through the Blessed Mother to Saint Anne, and from Saint Anne to Jesus, and back and forth. All right. So think of this little shrine. This was a beautiful little church, tiny little church. The priest who came there was very disturbed, Father Luc Desatel. All right.
Desolate.
Good thing you're here. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because one of our first years at Chenstohova was related to him. Yeah. Father Luc Desalet was very discouraged when he came to the parish because nobody was coming to church. Nobody was coming to church. On Sunday, a few old ladies came. They only came to gossip. They didn't come to pray, And so one Saturday afternoon, he was sitting in the confessional. And of course, nobody was coming. It was a hot day. Nobody was coming. Nobody ever came. And he heard something in church. Ooh, somebody's coming. But he looked out of the confessional. There was nobody there. But there was a pig. A pig had wandered into the church, and he was chewing on something. And when Father came, he was chewing on a rosary. The pig was chewing on. He took the rosary and he said, the people drop their rosaries and the pigs pick him up. We have to stop this. We have to do something. And he began to be filled with an apostolic zeal. And he went door to door, house to house, teaching, preaching, encouraging people with the rosary. And slowly but surely, the people started to come back. There was a great revival. And in fact, so great that the church was too small. They had to build a new church. So they quarried the stone across the St. Lawrence. There was a stone quarry. They quarried the stone there. And the plan was during the winter, when the river froze, they would just bring the stones over with their big sleds. The ox and the horses would pull these big sleds, and they would bring all the stones over, and they would build their church. Well, as it happened, it was a very mild winter. The winters in those days must have been really something for the St. Lawrence to freeze, because I can't imagine it now, but in those days it did. But that year it did not freeze because it was such a mild, unnaturally mild winter for those days. And so here it was March, and the river had not froze. And so that meant that the building of the new church was going to be delayed by a year, the next, because they couldn't afford to cart all of those stones all the way down towards Quebec to the big bridge and then back and then all the way. They couldn't afford to do that. So Father Luke started a novena, a rosary novena, and they began to pray the novena for 9 days. And on the last day, they were praying, and a terrific blizzard came. And they thought, this is an answer to our prayers. But excuse me, you think that the river is going to freeze over? Now, if any of you have ever gone across the St. Lawrence is 2 miles wide. If you go there today, you see oil tankers going by.
And it's quite a current too.
Yes, it's a huge, huge river, and it's deep, and there's quite a current. It's there. It's amazing. But of course, the river wasn't going to freeze overnight. But something unusual happened. Chunks of ice began to break off from someplace, and they began to set right at the edge of where the church was going to be built on the shore, and all the way across. It was like a bridge of ice.
A bridge of ice that just formed.
Yeah, and it just formed there. And the men very gingerly went over to see if it's that strong, and it was. And so the boys cut little branches of pine trees and put them on the edge, because it was dark. They didn't want to fall off the edge of the ice.
Bridge.
Yeah, and they got their horses and their sleds, and they started to go across this bridge, 2 miles. Now picture this: in the middle of a blizzard, the waves, the wind, the snow on this little bridge of ice. Excuse me, I would not go on ice.
You really trusted Our Lady, huh?
Yeah. I mean, really, would you go out ice skating? If it was only frozen for one day? No, of course not. You wait for a few days at least.
What year was that, Father?
This was
not that long ago.
No, it was in the 1870s or 60s, somewhere in there.
1870s.
Yeah,
so like
and
modern history.
What's interesting is some of these men were still alive in the 1950s and the 1960s because they were testifying to this too.
Yeah, an amazing miracle.
So they went across. They got the stones and they were coming back, going back and forth, bringing the stones on this ice bridge in the middle of the wind, the breezes, the waves and the like. And as the last horse and sled was coming across with stone, the bridge was disintegrating behind them. I mean, really. And they built the church. They built this
beautiful sanctuary,
lovely church. And they had made a promise. If they were able to do this, they would keep the old church as a shrine, which they did. And the beautiful statue of Our Lady of the Cape is right there.
It's a miraculous
statue, which also had many miracles in that little church. I was there in 1964, I think it was, and the week after I was there, there was a little pilgrimage of a few people, maybe a handful of people that came. And they brought this woman there because she was dying. And this is Claudette La Rochelle.
Yes.
Claudette La Rochelle, as a teenager, had ended up with, is it muscular dystrophy? MS or MD, I forget which one is fatal. MS, MD, I get that mixed up. But anyway, so she was being, her muscles were atrophying, as a teenager. So she was in her 20s now in a nursing home. She could no longer do anything for herself because her muscles had completely gone. She had to be strapped in a wheelchair. Even her head had to be held up with straps because she did not have the strength to hold her head up, and her head would fall and she would choke. She wouldn't be able to breathe. So she had to be held up that way. And her hands, she might get spastic movement and it could break a bone and cause more problems. So she had to be strapped literally, but yet she was cheerful, faith-filled, loving. The doctors came to her and said, Claudette, you're going to have to leave the nursing home. You only have maybe a week or so to live. Your disease had gone so far, it was now, that was it. So she said, I have one request. On my way to the hospital in Montreal, we're going to pass the shrine of Our Lady of the Cape. Can I stop there just to say goodbye and to prepare myself for heaven? So they did. They took her to the little shrine, which, as I say, is a little church. And they parked her wheelchair in the back of the little church. Mass was about to begin. And just before Mass was about to start, there were these terrible snapping sounds, like somebody was dropping something heavy, snapping. And people, what is going on? And suddenly they saw this crippled woman getting out of a wheelchair. The leather straps had snapped and broken open on her legs, on her arms. I could not tear a leather strap apart. No. She certainly had no strength. She had no muscle left. It had all atrophied. And she was standing up yet. The leathers had this, and she was walking to the altar, and she knelt at the altar rail, and they could hear her saying, Mother, thank you. Mother, thank you. Mother, thank you. And of course, the crowds went crazy when they saw and realized what had happened, that this woman had been instantly cured in this most dramatic way.
This was 1964.
1964, yeah. And if I had gone a week later, I might have seen it. But I'd gone the week before on a pilgrimage there. So Mary the daughter of Saint Anne produced this wonderful miracle. All right. So there is that path of miracles that you can see. Now, I call to attention the miracle of the ice bridge because it was witnessed by so many.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was not a private miracle. It was a huge public thing. Public.
And was published in newspapers
Yes.
and so on. Yes.
Oh, and people saw it. And then the miracle of Mr. Ahearn, because it was such a public thing. People knew him. They saw the before and after. I mean, it was just such an amazing thing. And so all of these things, God manifest his love. Wow, in such a beautiful way. Listen, Jesus wants every one of us to know his love and to know his power and to know the beauty and truth of the way of life that he has for us here and now, so that someday we can be with him forever in eternity.
Amen.
That's an amazing, amazing thing. So, we have to begin to look and investigate and study these things. These are terrible times that we're living in. You know that.
Yes.
I know that. I mean, unless you're living under a rock, these are very difficult days that we're living in. But we have something more powerful than the crazy things that are going on now. We have Jesus Christ, and we have him in the Eucharist. When I go to church, Jesus is there in the tabernacle waiting for me. When I offer Mass, he comes down on the altar for me and for you and for you and for you to be with us because he loves us. The grandson of good Saint Anne comes to be with you and me. What a wonderful thing that is, So maybe you haven't been to church lately. A lot of these people, I bet, haven't been to church lately because they're afraid of that germ, okay? Jesus is more powerful than the germ. Good Saint Anne has God's power,
Amen.
and she's more powerful than a germ. Listen, if you haven't been to church for a while, get there. Don't you think?
Yes.
Get there
Absolutely.
and get the power of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. Go to confession, go to Holy Communion, and know that you are with Jesus Christ, who is all power, all glory, all majesty, all wonder, all beauty, all truth, all healing, and you are safe with him. You're safe with him, with Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Father. It's an amazing testimony, and it's just to see how God loves us so much, that he's manifesting himself in many ways, and we just have to have our eyes open because these things happened in the past, some of them more recently, but these are testimonies that are true. These are published testimonies. These are true testimonies, and we need to repeat them. This is part of our program here in the Hearts of the Holy Family, is that we need to bring out these truths, bring out the glories of heaven, because Saint Anne was right there with the child Jesus in the house of Nazareth. She played with the child Jesus. But she is our grandmother, because she is Jesus's grandmother, and obviously because everything that Jesus has, we inherit through our baptism. So we thank God for the gift of faith, and so we'll continue this pilgrimage together. I want to thank all of you for being attentive to this program, and hopefully through the grace of God, we hope and pray that you invoke Saint Anne, especially if you're grandparents. You need to invoke Saint Anne for your grandchildren. They need you. Well, God bless you, and God bless Maria Vision.